pregnant wife arrived with the papers in hand, and the mistress left the courtroom in tears. The manila folder felt heavier than it should have in Lillian Carter's hands as she sat in the back of the taxi, watching the Los Angeles County Superior Court building grow larger through the rain-streaked window. At 34 weeks pregnant, every movement required calculation, but today, she moved with a precision that surprised even herself. "You sure you're okay, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "You look like you're about to have that baby right here in my cab." Lillian's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, where her daughter had been unusually quiet all morning. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. "Just nervous about court." The truth was more complicated. 3 weeks ago, she had been a different woman entirely. 3 weeks ago, she still believed that Gavin's late nights were about securing the Morrison project, that his weekend trips were necessary for expanding their architectural firm, and that his sudden need for space was just the stress of impending fatherhood. 3 weeks ago, she hadn't yet seen the laptop screen that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. The taxi pulled up to the curb, and Lillian carefully counted out the fare with steady hands. She had learned to control the shaking that had plagued her since that night. Control was all she had left now. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she made her way through the metal detectors. Her maternity dress, navy blue, professional, chosen specifically to look competent rather than pitiful, drew sympathetic glances from security guards and other visitors. She hated the pity almost as much as she hated what had brought her here. "Lillian?" She turned to see her attorney, David Restrepo, approaching with his briefcase and the kind of expression lawyers wore when they weren't entirely confident about the day ahead. He was young, probably too young, but he was what she could afford after discovering that half their joint accounts had been mysteriously depleted over the past year. "How are you feeling?" he asked, though his eyes went immediately to the folder in her hands. "Did you bring what we discussed?" "Everything," she said simply. "More than we discussed, actually." David's eyebrows raised slightly, but before he could respond, the elevator doors opened to reveal Gavin Holt stepping out with his legal team. Even now, even knowing what she knew, Lillian felt her breath catch. He still looked like the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Tall, confident, with those green eyes that had once made her feel like the only woman in the world. But he wasn't alone. Marissa Vane emerged from behind Gavin's attorney, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the harsh courthouse lighting. She was smaller than Lillian had imagined from the photos, more delicate, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from never having carried a child or stayed up nights worrying about mortgage payments. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Lillian's monthly grocery budget, and when she looked at Lillian's pregnant form, there was something in her expression that might have been triumph. "Lillian." Gavin's voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the way his eyes flicked to her belly, then away as if the sight of his unborn daughter was somehow inconvenient. "Gavin." She kept her voice equally level, though her grip on the folder tightened almost imperceptibly. Marissa stepped closer to Gavin, not quite taking his arm but making her presence unmistakable. "I hope this can all be resolved quickly," she said, directing her words to David rather than Lillian. "It's been such a difficult time for everyone." The audacity of it nearly took Lillian's breath away. Here was the woman who had been texting her husband about weekend getaways while Lillian was in her first trimester, throwing up every morning and trying to keep their business running. Here was the woman who had received spa treatments and designer handbags purchased with money from the company Lillian had helped build, speaking as if she were the injured party, but Lillian said nothing. She had learned over these past 3 weeks that silence could be more powerful than screaming. "Shall we go in?" David asked, sensing the tension. As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Lillian felt the weight of the folder again. Inside were printouts of text messages that would make Gavin's attorney very uncomfortable, receipts that would require explanations, bank transfers that painted a picture of deception stretching back months before Lillian had any idea her marriage was ending. She had spent countless nights organizing it all, cross-referencing dates and amounts while her baby kicked restlessly inside her, as if even the child could sense the betrayal surrounding them. Judge Harrison's courtroom was smaller than she had expected, more intimate, which somehow made everything feel more real. As they took their seats, Lillian and David on one side, Gavin, Marissa, and their legal team on the other, she caught her husband looking at her with something that might have been regret. Too late for that, she thought, resting her free hand on her belly. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Lillian struggled to her feet. the folder pressed against her chest like armor. But as Judge Harrison took his seat and began reviewing the preliminary paperwork, Lillian noticed something that made her blood run cold. Gavin and Marissa were exchanging glances, subtle smiles, the kind of wordless communication that comes from intimate familiarity. They thought they had already won. What would you do if you walked into that courtroom, pregnant and betrayed, watching your cheating husband and his mistress smile like they'd already won? Would you stay silent and trust your evidence? Or would the rage consume you first? Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and glanced at the case file before him. This is a dissolution of marriage proceeding between Lillian Carter and Gavin Holt. I understand there are contested assets and allegations of financial impropriety. Gavin's attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Lawson, stood first. Your Honor, my client is seeking an amicable resolution. Mr. Holt acknowledges that the marriage has irretrievably broken down, but he disputes any claims of wrongdoing. He's prepared to offer reasonable spousal support given Mrs. Carter's condition. The way she said condition made Lillian's jaw tighten, as if pregnancy was some kind of disability, rather than the natural result of a marriage that, until 3 weeks ago, she'd believed was solid. David rose beside her. Your Honor, my client has evidence of significant financial misconduct that directly impacts the division of marital assets. Objection, Lawson interjected smoothly. We haven't seen any such evidence, and making inflammatory accusations without— Ms. Lawson, Judge Harrison interrupted. This isn't a criminal trial. Let's hear what evidence Mrs. Carter has before we object to its existence. Lillian watched Gavin's face carefully as David spoke. Her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, maintained his composed expression, but she caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed once against the table before he forced them still. 7 years of marriage had taught her to read his tells, but it was Marissa's reaction that truly caught her attention. The younger woman sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but there was something rigid about her posture now, something that hadn't been there in the hallway when she'd worn her quiet confidence like expensive perfume. Mrs. Carter, Judge Harrison said, you may present your evidence. Lillian stood slowly, her hand automatically supporting her back as she rose. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from Figueroa Street below. She opened the manila folder. Your Honor, I have documentation showing that over the past 18 months, my husband has used our joint business accounts to fund what I believe to be an extramarital relationship. Her voice was steady, professional. She might have been presenting a quarterly report rather than the destruction of her marriage. That's a serious allegation, Judge Harrison said. What kind of documentation? Lillian pulled out the first sheet, a credit card statement she'd found in Gavin's desk drawer, one from an account she hadn't known existed. This shows charges for a weekend at the Montage Laguna Beach last February. 2 guests, spa services, dinner for 2. She looked directly at Gavin. I was home that weekend with morning sickness. He told me he was visiting the Riverside construction site. Gavin's attorney leaned over to whisper something to him, but Lillian wasn't finished. The spa services were booked under the name M. Vane. She turned slightly to look at Marissa, whose carefully composed expression finally cracked. The same M. Vane who received a wire transfer of $3,000 from our business account 2 weeks later, with the notation, consulting services. She paused. We have no record of Ms. Vane ever providing consulting services to our firm. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even the court reporter seemed to pause in her typing. Marissa's face had gone pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. She reached for Gavin's arm, but he was staring at the papers in Lillian's hands, as if they might spontaneously combust. Your Honor, Lawson said, her voice slightly strained. We would need time to review. There's more, Lillian interrupted quietly. She pulled out another document. Bank records showing that over $800 in charges to Victoria's Secret, Nordstrom, and Tiffany & Co. were made on our joint credit card, all shipped to an address in West Hollywood. She looked at Marissa again. Ms. Vane's address, according to the shipping records I was able to obtain. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Ms. Vane, are you present in an official capacity today? Marissa's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm here for moral support. For moral support, Lillian repeated, her tone conversational. That's interesting because according to these text messages, she pulled out a thick stack of printed pages. You've been providing quite a lot of different kinds of support. Gavin finally found his voice. Lillian, please what? She turned to face him fully for the first time since entering the courtroom. Please continue to pretend I don't know about the Atlanta conference where you took her instead of me. Please ignore the fact that you spent our anniversary weekend in Santa Barbara with her while telling me you had food poisoning." Her voice never rose above normal speaking volume, but something in her tone made Gavin flinch as if she'd shouted. "The text messages show a pattern of deception going back 14 months, she continued, addressing the judge again. "They also show that Mr. Holt promised Ms. Vane that once our divorce was finalized, she would have a position in the company." She paused. "The company that I helped build from nothing. The company that bears my maiden name alongside his." Patricia Lawson was frantically scribbling notes, but Lillian could see the defeat already creeping into her posture. There was no spin for this. No way to paint these facts in a favorable light. "Your Honor," David said, "we're prepared to present evidence that Mr. Holt has essentially been funding an entirely separate life, while his pregnant wife believed they were planning their future together." Judge Harrison looked at the papers Lillian held, then at Gavin and Marissa. The younger woman had tears in her eyes now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of someone who just realized the game was over. "Mr. Holt," the judge said, "is this your signature on these bank transfers?" Gavin stared at the document Lillian held up. His own handwriting stared back at him, condemning him in blue ink. Yes, Your Honor, but nothing," Lillian said softly. "You spent our daughter's college fund on your girlfriend's wardrobe." The weight of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Even the bailiff seemed to shift uncomfortably. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "I think we're going to need to take a recess to allow all parties to review this evidence properly." As people began to rise, Lillian carefully placed the papers back in her folder. She'd shown them less than a quarter of what she had. Walking past Gavin and Marissa toward the exit, she heard the younger woman's voice, cracked and desperate. "You said she would never find out. You said she never looked at the accounts." Lillian paused at the door and looked back one more time. "You forgot," she said quietly, "that I'm an accountant." The courthouse hallway buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that followed courtroom drama. Lillian found herself alone by the water fountain, one hand supporting her lower back, while the other still clutched the manila folder. Her baby had finally started moving again, restless kicks that seemed to mirror her own racing heartbeat. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter?" She turned to find a young woman in a rumpled blazer approaching, press badge visible on her lapel. Behind her, a man with a camera hung back respectfully. "I'm Catalina Reyes from Channel 7 News. We're covering courthouse proceedings today, and I couldn't help but notice." "No comment," Lillian said firmly, but not unkindly. "I understand, but if you change your mind." Catalina handed her a business card. "Sometimes telling your story can help other women in similar situations." As the reporter walked away, Lillian heard familiar voices from around the corner. She moved closer, staying out of sight. "Complete disaster." Patricia Lawson's voice was sharp with frustration. "Why didn't you tell me about the transfers? About any of this?" "I didn't think she knew." Gavin's response was barely audible. Lillian never looked at the detailed statements, she just handled the basic bookkeeping. A bitter laugh escaped from someone. "Marissa, basic bookkeeping? Gavin, she's a forensic accountant. You told me she just did invoicing." The silence that followed was thick with realization. Lillian almost smiled. She'd let Gavin believe she was just handling simple tasks while she actually managed their complex business finances. It had been easier that way. Let him feel important while she did the real work behind the scenes. "A forensic accountant," Patricia repeated slowly. "Jesus Christ, Gavin. Do you understand what that means? She's trained to find hidden money, to track financial fraud, and you've been leaving a paper trail for 18 months. We need to settle." Marissa's voice was panicked now. "Whatever she wants, we need to settle. If this goes public, if the licensing board finds out about the money—" "The licensing board?" Patricia's voice rose. "What about the licensing board?" Lillian pressed closer to the wall. This was information she hadn't expected. "The Architectural Licensing Board has strict ethics requirements," Gavin said miserably. "If they investigate the business finances and find that I was using company funds for personal expenses, you could lose your license." Patricia finished. "Your entire career. We could lose the Morrison project," Marissa added. "The contract has a morality clause. If there's any kind of scandal—" Lillian's eyes widened. The Morrison project was worth $3 million, the biggest contract their firm had ever secured. She'd spent months preparing the initial proposals while Gavin schmoozed the clients at charity galas she was too pregnant to attend. Charity galas where he'd apparently brought Marissa as his guest. Mrs. Carter? She turned to find David approaching, his expression concerned. The recess is almost over. Are you ready for the next round? She looked at the folder in her hands, thinking about what she'd just overheard. David, what do you know about ethics violations for licensed architects? His eyebrows rose. In California, the board takes them very seriously. Why? Just curious. She paused. What about morality clauses in major construction contracts? David's expression sharpened with understanding. Most big projects include them now. Protects the client from being associated with any kind of scandal. He studied her face. What aren't you telling me? Before she could answer, they heard shouting from around the corner. Not my fault you married someone smarter than both of us. Marissa's voice had lost all its earlier composure. Keep your voice down, Gavin hissed. Why? So more reporters don't hear how you've been lying to me for months? You said she was just some housewife who did data entry. She is. She was. I don't know how She's been playing you this entire time. Marissa's laugh was sharp and bitter. While you thought you were so clever sneaking around, she was probably documenting every lie, every dollar, every hotel room. She's been 3 steps ahead of us from the beginning. Lillian heard footsteps approaching and quickly moved back toward the courtroom doors. But not before she heard Patricia Lawson's voice, cold and professional. I'm withdrawing from this case effective immediately. Find yourself another lawyer, Mr. Holt. I don't represent idiots. David grabbed Lillian's arm gently. Did you hear? Every word. She looked at him seriously. David, I need you to file a complaint with the California Architects Board first thing tomorrow morning, and I want you to contact Morrison Development Group. Lillian, what are you thinking? She thought about the nights she'd spent alone while pregnant, believing Gavin was working late, the morning sickness she'd endured while he was at the montage with another woman, the way Marissa had looked at her in the hallway, as if she were already planning to redecorate Lillian's house. I'm thinking they haven't seen anything yet. The bailiff appeared in the doorway. Court is resuming in 5 minutes. As they walked back into the courtroom, Lillian noticed Gavin and Marissa at their table. Patricia Lawson was nowhere to be seen, her chair empty. Gavin was frantically scrolling through his phone, presumably trying to find another attorney while Marissa sat rigid beside him, her earlier tears replaced by something that looked like fury. Judge Harrison took his seat and immediately noticed the missing attorney. Mr. Holt, where's your counsel? Gavin stood awkwardly. Your Honor, there's been a scheduling conflict. I need to request a continuance to secure new representation. A scheduling conflict? The judge looked skeptical. Ms. Lawson was here 20 minutes ago. Lillian watched Marissa grip the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the polished wood. The younger woman's perfectly styled appearance was starting to crack. Her lipstick had worn off, and her foundation couldn't quite hide the stress blotches appearing on her neck. Your Honor, David said, standing. My client objects to any delay. Mr. Holt has had ample time to prepare for these proceedings. Furthermore, Lillian said, rising slowly to her feet, I believe Mr. Holt's current legal difficulties extend beyond this divorce proceeding. Judge Harrison leaned forward. What do you mean by that, Mrs. Carter? Lillian opened her folder again and pulled out a different set of papers. I've prepared a formal complaint to file with the California State Board of Architectural Examiners regarding potential violations of professional conduct standards. The color drained from Gavin's face completely. I've also drafted a letter to Morrison Development Group, informing them of the financial irregularities in their contracted architectural firm. Marissa made a sound like a wounded animal. The Morrison project wasn't just Gavin's biggest contract. It was supposed to be their future, the foundation of the life they'd planned to build together on the ashes of his marriage to Lillian. Your Honor, Gavin said desperately, this is vindictive. She's trying to destroy my career out of spite. Lillian looked at him calmly. I'm trying to protect future clients from an architect who can't manage his own finances ethically. And I'm trying to protect our daughter from inheriting debt instead of assets. Judge Harrison examined the papers she held. Mrs. Carter, these complaints, have you filed them yet? Not yet, Your Honor. I wanted to give Mr. Holt one final opportunity to be honest about the full extent of his financial misconduct. The trap was perfect, and everyone in the room could see it. Gavin could continue lying and face professional ruin, or he could tell the truth and face personal humiliation. Either way, the man who had spent months treating her like a fool was about to learn exactly how costly that mistake would be. The 20-minute recess felt like an eternity. Lillian sat on a bench outside the courtroom. watching through the tall windows as news vans began gathering in the parking lot below. Word traveled fast in Los Angeles legal circles, especially when it involved a prominent architect's very public downfall. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Phoenix. Saw the news alert. Are you okay? News alert. Lillian closed her eyes briefly. She'd wanted justice, not publicity, but sometimes the two came as a package deal. Lillian. She looked up to find Gavin standing a few feet away. Alone. Marissa was nowhere to be seen, and neither was his usual swagger. He looked older somehow, diminished. Can we talk? Just for a minute? She gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench, though she kept her folder close to her chest. You have 1 minute. He sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? The affair or stealing from our business to pay for it? It wasn't stealing, it was our money. Our money that you spent on another woman without telling me. Her voice remained steady. Our money that you used to take her to places we talked about visiting together. Our money that bought her jewelry while I was clipping coupons to save for the baby's nursery. Gavin was quiet for a long moment. The Morrison Project can support all of us. You, the baby, even your girlfriend? Lillian shook her head. You really thought you could have both, didn't you? Keep me as the responsible wife raising your child while playing house with her on weekends. She makes me feel young again. The honesty of it hit harder than any lie could have. Lillian felt her daughter kick, as if responding to the tension in her voice. And I made you feel old? You made me feel... He searched for words. Trapped. Like every conversation was about mortgages and retirement plans and prenatal vitamins. When was the last time we did something spontaneous? When was the last time you asked me to? She shifted uncomfortably, the baby's weight pressing against her ribs. When was the last time you suggested we do something together that wasn't related to work or preparing for this baby? You stopped trying, Gavin, you just started lying instead. Through the windows she could see Marissa pacing in the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from this distance, her body language screamed panic. She's calling her parents, Gavin said, following Lillian's gaze. Her father co-signed the lease on her West Hollywood apartment. If this gets back to her family, good. The word came out harder than Lillian intended. Maybe her family should know what kind of person she really is. Lillian, please. The licensing board investigation will ruin everything we built together. She turned to look at him fully. Everything we built together was ruined the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The licensing board investigation will just make it official. David appeared in the hallway looking grim. Lillian, we need to talk. Morrison Development just called my office. Gavin's face went ashen. They called you? How did they? Because, Lillian said, standing slowly. I sent them a courtesy notice this morning. As a professional courtesy, before the story breaks on the evening news. You did what? Gavin shot to his feet. That contract is worth $2.3 million, I know. I negotiated the payment schedule. She looked at him calmly. I also included the morality clause at their request. Insurance companies require them now for projects over $2 million. David cleared his throat. Morrison's legal team wants to meet tomorrow morning. They're concerned about potential liability issues. Gavin began pacing, his composure finally cracking completely. This is insane. You're destroying everything out of spite. I'm protecting my daughter's future, Lillian corrected, and making sure she never has to wonder if her father is a man of his word. All rise, the bailiff's voice echoed from the courtroom. As they filed back in, Lillian noticed that Marissa had returned, but her earlier poise was completely gone. Her mascara was smudged, her hands shaking as she tried to fix her hair. The phone call to her parents had clearly not gone well. Judge Harrison took his seat and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. Mr. Holt, I understand you're proceeding without counsel. Temporarily, Your Honor. I'm seeking new representation. Very well. Mrs. Carter, you mentioned additional evidence. I'd like to review it now. Lillian stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, these are phone records showing a pattern of deception. She handed over several pages. The highlighted calls show that Mr. Holt was in contact with Ms. Vane during our anniversary dinner last year. 37 text messages while we were at dinner. Judge Harrison examined the records. During your anniversary dinner? Yes, Your Honor. I remember because he kept apologizing for work emergencies. I thought he was being considerate, stepping outside to take calls so he wouldn't disturb other diners. Marissa made a choking sound from the gallery. I also have security footage from the Westin Bonaventure, Lillian continued, producing a flash drive. Mr. Holt charged a room to our business account for a client meeting on March 15th. The footage shows him entering with Ms. Vane at 2:47 p.m. and leaving together at 11:23 p.m. Security footage? Gavin whispered. The hotel keeps digital records for insurance purposes. All I had to do was request them as the business account holder. Judge Harrison plugged the flash drive into his computer. The large monitor visible to the courtroom flickered to life, showing grainy but unmistakable footage of Gavin and Marissa entering the hotel lobby hand in hand. Marissa buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. But this time, Lillian suspected, the tears were real. March 15th, Lillian said quietly, was the day I had my anatomy scan, the day we found out we were having a daughter. I called you 3 times that afternoon to share the news. The timestamp on the video showed 3:17 p.m., exactly when one of those missed calls would have come through. You were choosing her over our baby before she was even born. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Judge Harrison turned off the monitor and removed the flash drive. Mr. Holt, given the evidence presented, I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all marital assets pending a full financial audit. Your Honor, Gavin started desperately, that will shut down our business. Your business, Judge Harrison corrected firmly, appears to have been funding activities that constitute a breach of fiduciary duty to your spouse. Until we can determine exactly how much marital property has been misappropriated, nothing gets moved. As the implications sank in, Lillian watched Gavin's world collapse in real time. No access to business accounts meant no payroll, no operating expenses, no way to maintain the facade of success that had attracted Marissa in the first place. And judging by the look of horror on Marissa's face, she was doing the same math. The woman who had smiled so confidently in the hallway was about to learn that dating a man in financial freefall was far less glamorous than she'd imagined. 3 days after the asset freeze, Lillian sat in her obstetrician's office listening to her daughter's steady heartbeat on the monitor. Dr. Isabel Moreno smiled as she moved the ultrasound wand across Lillian's belly. Everything looks perfect. Baby's measuring right on track for 35 weeks. Dr. Moreno paused, studying Lillian's face. How are you handling the stress? I saw the news coverage. Lillian had tried to avoid the local news, but her neighbor, Mrs. Kim, had knocked on her door yesterday morning with a concerned expression and a printed article from the LA Times business section. Prominent architect under ethics investigation following divorce proceedings. I'm managing, Lillian said, though she felt anything but manageable. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with reporters, curious friends, and, most surprisingly, potential clients who'd heard about her forensic accounting skills. The most important thing right now is keeping your blood pressure stable, Dr. Moreno said, printing out ultrasound photos. Have you thought about staying with family until this settles down? Before Lillian could answer, her phone buzzed with a call from David. She'd been expecting this. I should take this, she told the doctor. Lillian, David's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. You need to sit down. I'm lying down. What happened? Morrison Development terminated the contract an hour ago, effective immediately. They cited the morality clause and potential reputational damage. Lillian closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and something darker. And? Gavin's scrambling to find emergency funding to keep the office open. Without the Morrison advance payments, he can't make payroll for his staff. 3 of his employees called me this morning asking about unpaid wages. She thought about Javier and Knox, the 2 junior architects who'd worked overtime on the Morrison project, believing they were building something lasting. They had families too. David, what about wrongful termination claims? Can the employees? Already handled. I referred them to an employment attorney. They'll be fine. He paused. But there's more. Marissa's landlord called. Her landlord? Apparently Gavin was co-signing her lease under the table. The landlord saw the news coverage and wants to know if the lease payments are going to continue, now that the business accounts are frozen. Lillian felt her daughter kick sharply, as if reacting to her mother's spike in adrenaline. So she's facing eviction? Potentially. Her father already pulled his financial support. I guess he wasn't thrilled to learn his daughter was someone's mistress. And without Gavin's backing, she's on her own. Lillian found she felt no satisfaction in this, only a hollow kind of justice. There's something else, David continued. The California bar is reviewing our complaint. They want to meet with you next week. After hanging up, Lillian drove slowly through the streets of Los Angeles, taking the long way home through neighborhoods she and Gavin had once explored together when they were young and broke and planning their future. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now young, broke, and planning a future again. just not the one she'd expected. She pulled into the driveway of their modest Glendale home, the one they'd bought 5 years ago, with dreams of filling it with children and laughter. Now it felt like a museum of a life that had never really existed. Inside, she found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Her name was written on the outside in handwriting she didn't recognize. Feminine, careful cursive. She opened it carefully. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Brielle Santos. I work as a receptionist at Morrison Development Group. I wanted you to know that when our legal team called to terminate your husband's contract, they mentioned how impressed they were with your documentation and professionalism. Mr. Morrison asked me to reach out because they're looking for a forensic accountant for an upcoming project in Riverside County. The pay is substantial, and they specifically requested someone with your expertise. If you're interested, please call me at the number below. Some of us believe in supporting women who stand up for themselves. Brielle." Lillian read the note 3 times before it fully sank in. Morrison Development, the same company that had just destroyed Gavin's career, was offering her work, not out of pity but because they'd been impressed by her competence. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Gavin's number. "Hello? Lillian, please, you have to help me." His voice was ragged, desperate. "I can't access any of the accounts. The staff is threatening to quit. The office lease is due next week and I can't." "You can't what, Gavin?" "I can't lose everything. Not like this." She looked around their living room at the crib they'd assembled together 3 months ago, at the wedding photos she still hadn't taken down. "You already lost everything. You lost it the moment you decided I wasn't worth being faithful to. This isn't just about me. Javier has a baby on the way too. Knox just bought his first house. You're destroying innocent people. I referred them to an employment lawyer. They'll recover their wages and find better jobs with honest employers." She paused. "You, on the other hand, created this mess entirely by yourself. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to rebuild from this?" The question hung in the air between them. Lillian thought about all the nights she'd lain awake wondering the same thing about herself. How do you rebuild when the foundation of your life turns out to be built on lies? "I don't know, Gavin, but I guess you'll figure it out the same way I had to." She hung up and immediately called the number Brielle Santos had left. "Morrison Development, this is Brielle. This is Lillian Carter. I received your note about the Riverside project." "Mrs. Carter, oh, I'm so glad you called. Mr. Morrison wanted me to tell you that he's available to meet as early as tomorrow if you're interested." He said. Brielle's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "He said anyone who could document financial fraud that thoroughly while 7 months pregnant is exactly the kind of detail-oriented professional his company needs." After scheduling the meeting, Lillian sat in her quiet living room, feeling her daughter's movements beneath her hands. For the first time in weeks, the kicks felt celebratory rather than anxious. Outside, she could see Gavin's BMW pulling into the driveway. But instead of coming to the front door, he sat in the car for several minutes, presumably making more desperate phone calls. When he finally approached the house, she watched through the window as he hesitated at the door, his key still in his hand. Then, as if remembering that this was no longer his home, he knocked. But Lillian was already walking toward the back of the house, toward the nursery where their daughter's future was waiting. She didn't answer the door. She had nothing left to say to the man who had taught her that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal was simply moving forward without looking back. The Morrison Development offices in Century City felt like stepping into a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Los Angeles, and the receptionist, Brielle Santos, greeted Lillian with genuine warmth, rather than the pitying glances she'd grown accustomed to over the past week. "Mr. Morrison is so excited to meet you," Brielle said, guiding Lillian down a hallway lined with photos of completed projects. "The whole office has been talking about how you handled that situation. Very professional." Lillian adjusted her blazer over her expanding belly. At 35 weeks, professional maternity clothes were expensive, but the Riverside project would more than cover the investment if today went well. "Mrs. Carter." Richard Morrison was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of confident handshake that came from building an empire from scratch. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" "Water would be nice, thank you." As they settled into his office, Morrison pulled out a thick file folder. "I'll be direct with you, Mrs. Carter. We terminated your husband's contract not just because of the ethics issues, but because our preliminary audit found some concerning discrepancies in his billing practices." Lillian's hand stilled on her water glass. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Phantom consulting fees, inflated material costs, Hours billed for work that our project managers couldn't verify. Morrison leaned forward, the kind of creative accounting that suggests someone was treating our project like a personal ATM. She thought about the unexplained withdrawals she'd found in their business account, the ones Gavin had dismissed as miscellaneous project expenses. Her forensic training had flagged them immediately, but she'd trusted her husband's explanations. How much are we talking about? Potentially $60,000 over 6 months. We're still investigating, but Morrison studied her face carefully. We want to hire you to conduct that investigation. The irony was breathtaking. They wanted her to forensically audit her own husband's fraud. Mr. Morrison, there could be a conflict of interest. Not anymore. As of yesterday, you have no financial stake in Holt Architecture. The divorce proceedings establish you as a separate entity. He slid a contract across the desk. We're prepared to offer you $40,000 for a complete financial analysis, plus a retainer for ongoing work if you're interested. $40,000. More than enough to secure her own apartment, hire the best divorce attorney in the city, and set aside money for the baby's expenses. Financial independence, earned by exposing the very lies that had destroyed her marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her blood run cold. Stop destroying his life or you'll regret it. People know where you live. Morrison noticed her expression change. Everything all right? I think I'm being threatened. By whom? Before she could answer, Betrayal knocked on the door. Mr. Morrison? There's a situation in the lobby. Someone's demanding to see Mrs. Carter. Through the glass walls of Morrison's office, Lillian could see the elevator doors opening. Marissa Vane stepped out. But this wasn't the composed woman from the courthouse. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater that looked like they'd been slept in. That's her, Lillian said quietly. Morrison pressed his intercom button. Security to the lobby, please. But Marissa was already talking loudly to Betrayal, her voice carrying across the open office space. I know she's here. I know you offered her Gavin's job. This is harassment. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice, Betrayal said firmly. Lower my voice? Do you know what she's done to us? Gavin can't even afford gas money. I'm getting evicted because of her vindictive. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Security arrived. 2 professional-looking men who approached Marissa with the kind of calm authority that suggested they'd handled this type of situation before. This isn't over, Marissa shouted as they escorted her toward the exit. You can't hide behind your lawyers forever. Morrison turned to Lillian with concern. Has she threatened you before? The text message just now was the first direct contact. Lillian showed him her phone. But I've seen her drive past my house twice this week. We take threats against our consultants very seriously. I'm calling LAPD to file a harassment report. As Morrison made the call, Lillian watched through the windows as Marissa was escorted to the parking structure. Even from the 20th floor, she could see the woman's agitated body language, the way she gestured wildly while talking on her phone. 20 minutes later, as Lillian was reviewing the Morrison contract, her phone rang. Gavin's number. I need you to call off Marissa, he said without preamble. She showed up at Morrison's office? Are you insane? I had nothing to do with that, Gavin. She's falling apart. Her parents cut her off completely after they found out about us. She's about to lose her apartment and now she's making threats. Threats that she sent to me, Lillian interrupted. Your girlfriend threatened a pregnant woman, Gavin. I've already filed a police report. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. A police report? His voice was hollow. LAPD takes harassment of pregnant women seriously, especially when there's a documented pattern of behavior. What pattern? What are you talking about? The drive-bys past my house, the phone calls from blocked numbers, the fact that somehow she knew I was meeting with Morrison today. Lillian's voice remained calm, but steel crept into her tone. Did you tell her where I'd be, Gavin? Another long silence. Jesus Christ, he whispered. You recorded everything, didn't you? Even this call? California is a 2-party consent state for recordings, Lillian said mildly. I would never break the law, but she didn't deny it either. Gavin, listen carefully. I didn't destroy your life. I simply stopped participating in the lie you built. There's a difference. The licensing board hearing is next week. If they revoke my certification, then you'll learn what it feels like to start over from nothing. Like I'm doing. You're not starting from nothing. You have the house. You have that Morrison job. I have a mortgage I can't afford, and a consulting contract I earned with my own skills. Everything else, the marriage, the business partnership, the future we planned, you threw that away yourself. She could hear voices in the background on his end, agitated conversation that sounded like an argument. "Is she there with you?" Lillian asked. "She has nowhere else to go. That's not my problem anymore." Before he could respond, she heard Marissa's voice clearly through the phone. "Tell her if she doesn't drop the complaints, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman abandons her husband when he needs her most." Lillian almost laughed. "Gavin, put me on speaker." "Lillian, don't. Put me on speaker. Now." A click, and then her voice filled whatever room they were in. "Marissa, this is Lillian. I want you to understand something very clearly. You didn't win a man. You won a liar. You didn't break up a happy marriage, you revealed an unhappy husband. And you didn't get a prize, you got exactly what you deserved." The silence was deafening. "The harassment stops now. The drive-bys stop now. Because the next time you threaten me or my daughter, I won't call the police first. I'll call Channel 7 News and tell them about the woman who's stalking a pregnant mother because her sugar daddy ran out of money." She hung up and immediately blocked both numbers. Outside Morrison's office windows, the Los Angeles skyline stretched endlessly, full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Lillian arrived at the California State Board of Architectural Examiners hearing 15 minutes early, partly out of professional habit and partly because she'd needed time to find a parking space that didn't require a 5-minute walk. At 36 weeks pregnant, every step felt deliberate. The waiting area was sterile and impersonal, filled with uncomfortable chairs and motivational posters about professional integrity. She recognized one of the board members from photos on their website, Dr. Antonio Delgado, a respected architect who designed half the public buildings in San Diego. "Mrs. Carter?" A woman in her 50s approached with a clipboard. "I'm Janet Holloway, board investigator. Thank you for coming in." "Of course. I brought additional documentation as requested." Janet's eyes went to the thick portfolio Lillian carried. "Additional?" "After filing the initial complaint, I discovered more irregularities. It seemed important to provide a complete picture." They were led into a conference room where 3 board members sat at a long table. Gavin was already there with a new attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Fuentes, who had the air of someone taking a case he probably shouldn't. "Mr. Holt," Dr. Delgado began, "you understand that these proceedings could result in suspension or revocation of your architectural license?" "Yes, sir. But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of these business expenses." Lillian almost admired his persistence. Even now, facing professional ruin, he was trying to spin his way out of consequences. "Mrs. Carter," another board member, Lynn Takahashi, addressed her directly. "You've provided evidence suggesting that your husband used business funds for personal expenses. Can you walk us through your findings?" Lillian opened her portfolio methodically. The first red flag was a pattern of cash withdrawals that coincided with Mr. Holt's travel schedule. $1,500 withdrawn in Atlanta, $2,200 in Phoenix, $1,800 in Seattle, all cities where the business had no active projects. She handed over bank statements with highlighted entries. Cross-referencing these dates with Ms. Vane's social media posts shows a clear correlation. "Social media posts?" Dr. Delgado asked. "Instagram photos of Ms. Vane in those same cities on those same dates. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, shopping trips, all funded by business account withdrawals." Robert Fuentes leaned forward. "Your Honor, social media posts don't prove. They do when combined with hotel receipts charged to company credit cards." Lillian interrupted smoothly. She produced another stack of papers. "The Fairmont in Seattle, the St. Regis in Atlanta, the Arizona Biltmore in Phoenix, all charged to Holt Architecture, all during periods when Mr. Holt claimed to be conducting site surveys for projects that didn't exist." The room fell silent except for the scratching of pens as board members took notes. "There's also the matter of consulting payments to Ms. Vane," Lillian continued. $14,000 over 8 months for services that were never performed and never contracted for in writing. "What kind of services?" Lynn Takahashi asked. "According to the payment descriptions, marketing consultation, and client relations." Lillian's voice remained professionally neutral. However, Ms. Vane has no marketing education or experience. Her LinkedIn profile shows she's worked primarily in retail and food service. Janet Holloway was typing rapidly on her laptop. "We'll need to verify these employment claims." "I've already contacted her previous employers," Lillian said, producing more documents. Urban Outfitters confirmed she worked part-time sales from 2019 to 2021. The Cheesecake Factory verified employment as a server until last year. No marketing or consulting experience anywhere in her work history. Gavin's new attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Carter, this level of investigation seems excessive for a divorce proceeding. Mr. Fuentes, Dr. Delgado interrupted. Fraud allegations against licensed professionals are taken very seriously by this board. If Mrs. Carter has evidence of financial misconduct, we need to hear it. Lillian felt her daughter kick sharply, as if approving of the direction things were taking. There's one more thing, she said, opening to the final section of her portfolio. I've identified a pattern of overbilling on the Morrison project specifically. The board members exchanged glances. Morrison Development was well known in Los Angeles construction circles. Materials that were billed at premium rates but purchased at standard cost. Labor hours that don't match actual site reports. Consulting fees for specialists who were never contracted. Lillian handed over a detailed spreadsheet. The total discrepancy is approximately $67,000. Robert Fuentes was frantically scribbling notes, but Lillian could see the defeat in his posture. There was no defense for this level of documented fraud. Mr. Holt, Dr. Delgado said quietly, do you have any response to these allegations? Gavin stared at the evidence spread across the table, evidence that his own wife had compiled with the kind of methodical precision that had once made him proud to have her as a business partner. His voice cracked slightly. I made some poor judgment calls, but I never intended to defraud anyone. Poor judgment calls? Lynn Takahashi picked up one of the bank statements. This shows you charged a weekend at the Four Seasons to the Morrison project budget while billing for foundation inspections that never happened. The stress of the project was affecting my personal life. I thought I could make up the hours later. You thought you could steal from clients and cover it up later, Dr. Delgado corrected bluntly. As the board members continued their questioning, Lillian's phone buzzed with a text from David. Marissa arrested an hour ago for violating restraining order. Tried to break into your house while you were at the hearing. Neighbor called police. She read the message twice, feeling a mixture of relief and something darker. Marissa's desperation had finally driven her over the legal line. Mrs. Carter? Janet Holloway was looking at her with concern. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine. Just some pregnancy discomfort. But as she looked across the table at Gavin, really looked at him, she saw a man she no longer recognized. The confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed appearance of someone watching their entire world collapse in slow motion. Mr. Holt, Dr. Delgado said finally, this board will issue its decision within 30 days. Until then, your license is suspended pending completion of this investigation. Suspended. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Gavin's head dropped into his hands. Without his license, he couldn't practice architecture anywhere in California. Couldn't sign off on projects. Couldn't bid on new work. Couldn't even legally call himself an architect. Furthermore, Lynn Takahashi added, we're referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Criminal charges. Lillian felt her daughter kick again, harder this time, as if celebrating a victory her mother was only beginning to understand. As they filed out of the conference room, Gavin approached her one last time. Are you happy now? He whispered. Is this what you wanted? Lillian looked at him. Really looked at the man who had once promised to love her through better and worse. I wanted a husband who wouldn't lie to me, she said simply. Since I couldn't have that, I'll settle for justice. Lillian was assembling the baby's crib when her doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m. Through the security camera app on her phone, she could see a woman in a business suit holding an official-looking envelope. Behind her stood a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy. Mrs. Carter, I'm Deputy District Attorney Carmen Velasco. Could we speak for a few minutes? The crib could wait. Lillian opened the door, one hand supporting her lower back as the baby seemed to press against every rib simultaneously. Please come in. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee would be great if you have it. Carmen Velasco was younger than Lillian had expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't lose cases often. As Lillian prepared coffee, Carmen spread documents across the dining table. The architectural board's referral landed on my desk this morning. I've spent the day reviewing your evidence, and frankly, it's some of the most thorough documentation I've seen in a fraud case. Fraud case? Lillian sat down carefully, the weight of the word settling over her. Wire fraud. Specifically, when your husband used business accounts to pay for personal expenses and then billed those expenses to clients, he crossed into federal territory. Carmen pointed to one of the bank statements. The Morrison project involved interstate commerce, which means we can prosecute under federal statutes. Lillian felt dizzy. Federal charges. Potentially 5 to 10 years if convicted, but that's why I'm here. Carmen leaned forward. We'd like you to testify for the prosecution. Your forensic analysis would be crucial to building an airtight case. Lillian touched her belly protectively. I just wanted him to take responsibility for what he did to our marriage. Mrs. Carter, what he did to your marriage was cruel. What he did to Morrison Development was criminal. And based on your documentation, Morrison wasn't his only victim. Carmen pulled out another file. We ran his billing practices through the database. 3 other clients have similar discrepancies. The Grand Central Market renovation project, the Pasadena Library expansion, the Beverly Hills residential complex. We're looking at potential fraud totaling over $200,000. $200,000. Lillian felt sick and not from pregnancy. How long has this been going on? Based on your evidence? At least 2 years. Probably longer. Carmen's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Carter, your husband wasn't just cheating on you. He was using your business and your reputation to fund a completely separate life. You're as much a victim here as Morrison Development. Before Lillian could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her neighbor's number. Hi, Mrs. Kim. Lillian, honey, there are cars outside your house, police cars and some kind of van. Are you okay? Through her front window, Lillian could see what Mrs. Kim meant. 2 LAPD units and what looked like a forensic accountant's van from the DA's office. They're executing a search warrant, Carmen explained, checking her phone. Your husband's office and residence. We needed to secure evidence before it could be destroyed. Lillian's house suddenly felt very small and very surreal. They're searching my house? Just the home office space. We have a very specific warrant for business documents and computer equipment. Carmen showed her the paperwork. Your personal belongings won't be touched. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Detective Luis Ramirez introduced himself and explained that they needed access to the converted garage where Gavin had kept business files. Mrs. Carter, Detective Ramirez said gently, we understand this is invasive, but time is critical. Your husband has been making some unusual financial moves since the divorce proceedings began. What kind of moves? Attempting to transfer remaining business assets to offshore accounts. Moving equipment from the office to storage units registered under false names. The detective consulted his notes. We believe he's preparing to flee the jurisdiction. Flee. The word hit Lillian like cold water. Where would he go? Ms. Vane has family in Costa Rica. No extradition treaty for financial crimes under $50,000. Carmen Velasco's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, her expression growing darker with each moment. They found him, she told Lillian after hanging up. LAX trying to board a flight to San Jose. Cash tickets purchased this afternoon. And Marissa? Already in Costa Rica. Left yesterday, apparently. Her bail was revoked when she missed her court appearance for the harassment charges. Lillian sat down heavily, the reality of the situation washing over her. They were planning to run. Using money stolen from clients, yes. The good news is we got to him before he could leave. The bad news is this confirms premeditation. The fraud charges just became much more serious. Detective Ramirez returned from the garage, carrying 2 boxes of documents and a laptop. Mrs. Carter, did you know your husband had a second set of books? What do you mean? Financial records showing the real expenses versus what was reported to clients. He was essentially running 2 versions of the same business. One for the IRS and clients, one that showed where the money actually went. Carmen examined the laptop briefly. This is exactly what we needed. Mr. Holt just made our case for us. As the law enforcement team prepared to leave, Lillian's phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer. Lillian? The voice was familiar but strange. Marissa, but calling from what sounded like a payphone or poor international connection. How did you get this number? I'm in San Jose. Gavin was supposed to be here hours ago, but the line crackled with static. They arrested him, didn't they? Lillian looked at Carmen, who nodded, and gestured for her to keep talking. Yes, they arrested him. A sound like sobbing came through the phone. I don't have any money. I used everything I had for the plane ticket, my passport. I can't get home without. That's not my problem, Marissa. Please, I know you hate me, but I'm stuck here. I don't speak Spanish. I don't know anyone. You should have thought about that before you helped him steal from his clients. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was stolen money. He told me he was successful, that the business was thriving. And you believed that justified destroying someone else's marriage? The sobbing on the other end grew louder. I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to build something together. You built something together. Lillian said quietly. You built a criminal case that's going to follow both of you for the rest of your lives. Lillian, please. Marissa, listen very carefully. You made your choice when you decided to help him lie to me for 18 months. You made your choice when you spent money meant for my daughter's future. You made your choice when you threatened a pregnant woman because your fantasy fell apart. She paused, feeling her daughter's strong kicks against her ribs. Now live with it. Lillian hung up and immediately blocked the international number. Carmen was watching her with something like admiration. That was the woman who helped your husband steal over $200,000 from his clients. That was the woman who helped herself to my life, and then acted surprised when it came with consequences. As the law enforcement team finished packing their evidence, Detective Ramirez approached Lillian one more time. Mrs. Carter, for what it's worth, I've worked fraud cases for 15 years. I've never seen documentation this thorough from a victim who was being deceived the entire time. He paused. You should be proud of yourself. After they left, Lillian stood alone in her quiet house, looking at the half-assembled crib and thinking about the phone call from Costa Rica. Somewhere in a foreign country, Marissa was learning what it felt like to be abandoned and alone. And somewhere in a Los Angeles County jail cell, Gavin was learning what it felt like to face the consequences of treating people like they didn't matter. Both lessons were long overdue. Lillian's water broke at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks before her due date and 12 hours before Gavin's sentencing hearing. As she sat in the labor and delivery room at Cedars-Sinai, timing contractions with one hand and reviewing her victim impact statement with the other, she couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic timing. Mrs. Carter, you really should focus on the delivery, Dr. Moreno said, checking the monitors. The statement can wait. The hearing is at 10 a.m. If she comes early enough, I want to be there. Absolutely not. You're in active labor. But Lillian's daughter had other plans. After 4 hours of intense labor, Sophia Elena Carter entered the world at 7:43 a.m., weighing 6 pounds, 2 ounces, with a cry that seemed to echo through the entire maternity ward. She's perfect, Dr. Moreno said, placing the baby on Lillian's chest. But you're not going anywhere today except home with this little one? Lillian looked down at her daughter, really looked at her, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Sophia had Lillian's dark hair and what looked like her grandmother's nose, but her eyes were entirely her own. David will read your statement, Dr. Moreno continued. You've done enough. But as Lillian held her daughter, she realized she wanted to be there. Not for revenge, not for closure, but to look Gavin in the eye one final time and show him exactly what he'd chosen to abandon. At 9:15 a.m., against every medical recommendation, Lillian walked into the federal courthouse carrying her 3-hour-old daughter. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, but David and 2 security guards formed a protective barrier around her. This is insane, David muttered as they made their way through the chaos. You gave birth this morning. She's his daughter too, Lillian said simply. He should see what he threw away from Marissa Vane. The courtroom was packed. Federal fraud cases involving licensed professionals always drew attention, but the timing had turned this into something approaching a media circus. Judge Francine Guerrero was known for her no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime, and the gravity of the situation was written across her stern face. Gavin sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. When he saw Lillian enter with the baby, his composure finally cracked completely. Mr. Holt, Judge Guerrero began, you've been convicted of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Before I impose sentence, is there anything you'd like to say? Gavin stood slowly, his chains rattling softly. Your Honor, I take full responsibility for my actions. I let my personal problems cloud my professional judgment, and I deeply regret the harm I've caused. Mr. Holt, you stole over $200,000 from clients who trusted you. You used that money to fund an extramarital affair while your pregnant wife believed you were working to support your growing family. Judge Guerrero's voice was ice cold. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated scheme that lasted over 2 years. Lillian watched Gavin's face as the judge spoke. She could see him fighting tears, fighting the reality of what his choices had cost him. Your Honor, Gavin's new attorney, a public defender named Miguel Santos, stood to speak. My client is prepared to make full restitution. With what money? Judge Guerrero interrupted. Mr. Holt's assets have been frozen. his business license revoked, and his professional reputation destroyed. How exactly does he plan to make restitution? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Mrs. Carter, Judge Guerrero addressed Lillian directly. I understand you've prepared a victim impact statement? Lillian handed Sophia to David and stood slowly. Every eye in the courtroom was on her as she approached the podium, including the news cameras that Judge Guerrero had reluctantly allowed given the public interest in the case. Your Honor, 3 months ago I thought I was married to a man building our future together. I thought the long hours and business trips were investments in our family's security. Her voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. I was wrong. I was married to a man who saw our marriage as a convenient cover story for criminal activity. She could see Gavin at the defendant's table, his head in his hands. The defendant didn't just steal money from clients. He stole time from his unborn daughter. He stole trust from a marriage. He stole the security I thought we were building together. She paused, looking directly at Gavin. And he did it all while making me feel guilty for questioning him. Your Honor, she continued, I'm not here seeking revenge. I'm here seeking accountability. The defendant needs to understand that actions have consequences, that lying has costs, and that the people he hurt were real people with real futures that he damaged for his own selfish desires. Judge Guerrero nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. You may be seated. As Lillian returned to her seat, she noticed a familiar figure in the back of the courtroom. Marissa Vane, but barely recognizable. Her hair was limp and unwashed. Her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, and she had the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. She'd somehow made it back from Costa Rica. Ms. Vane, Judge Guerrero said, clearly having noticed her as well. I understand you've returned from your travels abroad? Marissa stood shakily. Yes, Your Honor. I wanted to be here. To support Mr. Holt? Marissa's voice broke. To apologize. To Mrs. Carter. And to the court. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the baby had stopped fussing. Your Honor, I didn't know about the stolen money. I thought Gavin was successful, that he could afford. I thought he was divorced already when we started. She was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. I destroyed a family for a man who was lying to me about everything. Judge Guerrero looked at Marissa with something that might have been pity. Ms. Vane, you're facing your own charges for conspiracy and money laundering. I suggest you save your apologies for your own sentencing hearing. Gavin Holt, Judge Guerrero said, turning back to the defendant. I sentence you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to all victims and perform 500 hours of community service upon release. 4 years. Lillian felt Sophia stir in David's arms, and the timeline hit her with startling clarity. Her daughter would be in preschool before her father was released from prison. As court officers moved to escort Gavin away, he turned toward Lillian one last time. I'm sorry, he mouthed silently. Lillian looked at him holding their sleeping daughter, surrounded by evidence of her own strength and resilience, and realized that his apology no longer mattered. She had already forgiven herself for trusting him, and that was the only forgiveness that counted. 6 months later, Lillian stood in her new office in Pasadena, bouncing 6-month-old Sophia on her hip while reviewing financial statements for her third major client. The brass nameplate on her desk read Lillian Carter, CPA, CFE, Forensic Financial Consulting, and the phone hadn't stopped ringing since the LA Business Journal had featured her story under the headline, From Betrayal to Business, How One Woman Turned Personal Devastation into Professional Success. Mrs. Carter, her assistant, Nayeli Gutierrez, knocked on the open door. Channel 7 is here for the interview. Lillian glanced at her watch. Sophia was due for a nap, but the interview with Catalina Reyes, the same reporter who'd approached her at the courthouse, was important. They were filming a follow-up story about women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. Send them in. And Nayeli, could you warm a bottle for Sophia? The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of testimony, paperwork, and sleepless nights with a newborn, but they'd also been the most empowering months of Lillian's life. The Morrison development case had led to 3 more consulting contracts, then 5, then a waiting list of clients who wanted the forensic accountant who'd taken down her own husband's criminal enterprise. Mrs. Carter, Catalina Reyes said as the camera crew set up, 6 months ago you were a woman facing divorce and betrayal. Today you're running one of the most successful forensic accounting practices in Los Angeles. How does that feel? Lillian looked down at Sophia, who was grabbing at the pearls around her mother's neck, pearls she'd bought for herself with her first consulting paycheck. It feels like justice, she said simply. Not the kind you get in courtrooms, but the kind you create for yourself. What do you mean by that? When someone betrays you, you have two choices. You can spend your energy trying to punish them, or you can spend it building something better than what you lost. She shifted Sophia to her other hip. I chose to build. And what about Gavin Holt? Do you ever think about him? Lillian glanced at the newspaper clipping Naley had left on her desk that morning. The headline read, "Disgraced architect sentenced to additional 2 years for tax evasion." The article mentioned that federal investigators had uncovered even more financial crimes during their investigation, extending Gavin's prison sentence and adding substantial fines. I think about the lesson his choices taught me, she said carefully, that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about the people we love. And Marissa Vane? That was more complicated. Marissa had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy and money laundering charges. But more than that, her public testimony during Gavin's trial had revealed a woman who'd been as deceived as she was deceiving, manipulated by a man who'd promised her a future he was stealing from his wife to fund. I think she learned that fairy tales built on other people's suffering don't have happy endings. After the interview crew left, Lillian sat alone in her office, feeding Sophia while reviewing the day's financial reports. Through her window, she could see the San Gabriel Mountains in the distance, clear and sharp against the California sky. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brielle Santos, who'd become an unexpected friend. Saw the interview preview on Channel 7's website. You looked amazing. Coffee tomorrow? Another text, this one from her sister in Phoenix. Mom and Dad watched the live stream. They're so proud of you. And then, surprisingly, a message from David. Lillian thought you should know. Gavin's mother called my office. She wants to arrange visitation with Sophia when he's released. No pressure, but wanted to give you time to think about it. Lillian looked down at her daughter, who was staring up at her with those curious dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. 4 years from now, Sophia would be old enough to ask questions about her father. Old enough to wonder why some kids had daddies who came home every night and others didn't. She would tell her daughter the truth, age appropriately and without venom, that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love, that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome selfishness, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from someone who doesn't value what they have. Her computer chimed with an email notification. The subject line made her smile. Consultation request. Beverly Hills Hotel Group. Another potential client. Another opportunity to use her skills to help people uncover financial deception before it destroyed their lives. She was good at this work. Better than good. She was exceptional. The betrayal that had nearly broken her had revealed a strength and capability she'd never known she possessed. What do you think, Sophia? She whispered to her daughter. Should Mommy take on another case? Sophia gurgled and reached for Lillian's face with tiny, perfect fingers, as if saying yes. Lillian picked up her phone and dialed the Beverly Hills number. As it rang, she caught her reflection in the office window, a successful businesswoman holding her beautiful daughter, surrounded by the evidence of her own competence and determination. Beverly Hills Hotel Group, this is Daphne speaking. This is Lillian Carter from Carter Financial Consulting. I understand you need a forensic audit? Mrs. Carter, yes, we've been following your work. We have a situation with our accounting firm that we'd like you to investigate. Can you meet tomorrow? Absolutely. I'll have my assistant schedule something that works around my daughter's feeding schedule. After confirming the appointment, Lillian sat back in her chair and looked around her office. Her own office, paid for with her own money, filled with clients who respected her expertise. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman whose world was collapsing. Today, she was a woman whose world was exactly what she'd chosen to build. And tomorrow, she would help another client uncover the truth about their own financial situation, armed with the hard-earned knowledge that sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most extraordinary transformations. Sophia fell asleep in her arms, peaceful and content, unaware that her mother had just finished the most important case of her career, the case of her own rebirth. Outside, Los Angeles spread out beneath them like a promise, full of possibilities neither of them had imagined 6 months ago. 2 years later, Lillian pushed Sophia's stroller through the farmer's market in Old Pasadena, enjoying the California sunshine that filtered through the ancient oak trees. At 2 years old, Sophia was a chatterbox who pointed excitedly at every dog, flower, and colorful fruit stand they passed. Mama, look! Purple! Sophia's tiny finger pointed at a display of eggplants. That's right, baby. Purple eggplant. It was a Saturday morning ritual they'd developed. Farmer's market, then the playground, then home for Sophia's nap, while Lillian caught up on client work. Simple pleasures that felt like luxuries after everything they'd been through. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard Morrison. "Lillian, the Denver project needs your expertise again. Are you available next month?" Carter Financial Consulting had grown beyond her wildest expectations. She now employed 3 junior accountants and had a client waiting list that stretched into the next quarter. The work was challenging, meaningful, and allowed her to help other people avoid the financial devastation she'd experienced. "Mrs. Carter?" She turned to find a young woman approaching hesitantly, probably mid-20s, with nervous energy that Lillian recognized immediately. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you the Lillian Carter from the news stories?" "I am." Lillian had learned to handle recognition gracefully, though she still preferred her privacy. My husband has been acting strange about money lately. Secretive. I found some charges on our credit card that don't make sense, and when I asked him about them," the young woman's voice trailed off. "He got angry and defensive?" "Exactly. My friend said I should talk to someone like you, someone who understands financial problems in marriages." Lillian looked at this young woman, barely older than Marissa had been, and saw herself 2 years ago, confused, hurt, hoping there was an innocent explanation for the lies that were slowly destroying her trust. "What's your name?" "Celeste. Celeste Hoffman." "Celeste, can I give you some advice?" Lillian knelt down so Sophia could see the colorful flowers at the nearest stand. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong with your finances, it probably is. And don't let anyone convince you that asking questions makes you paranoid or controlling. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm ruining my marriage over nothing? Then you'll have peace of mind and a stronger marriage. But if you're right," Lillian straightened up, looking Celeste in the eye, "then you'll have the truth. And the truth, even when it's painful, is always better than living a lie." She handed Celeste her business card. "Call my office Monday. I have someone on my team who specializes in discreet financial reviews for situations like yours." As Celeste walked away, clutching the card like a lifeline, Lillian felt Sophia tugging on her sleeve. "Mama, swing?" "Yes, baby. Let's go to the swings." At the playground, Lillian pushed her daughter on the toddler swing while other parents chatted about weekend plans and birthday parties. Normal conversations about normal problems. The kind of life she'd thought she'd lost forever when her world collapsed in that courthouse 2 years ago. Her phone rang. David's number. "Lillian, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Gavin's up for early release. Good behavior. Completed some kind of financial responsibility program." She felt Sophia's weight in the swing, the trust in her daughter's laughter as she flew back and forth through the air. "When?" 6 months, maybe less. His lawyer called about visitation arrangements. Lillian had known this day would come eventually. She'd spent 2 years building a life stable enough to handle it. Set up a meeting. But David? Supervised visits only. At least until we see what kind of man prison made him. Of course. "And Lillian, you should know. He's been working as a bookkeeper in the prison finance office. Apparently he's good with numbers when he's not stealing them." After hanging up, Lillian watched her daughter play with the intense focus that only toddlers possessed. Sophia was fearless on the playground equipment, climbing and exploring with the confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love and security. That evening, as she tucked Sophia into her crib, Lillian noticed her daughter's latest artwork on the refrigerator, a finger painting that was mostly purple and yellow scribbles, but which Sophia insisted was "Mama and Sophia happy." On the kitchen counter, next to Sophia's artwork, sat 3 things that told the story of Lillian's transformation. A photo from the LA Business Journal featuring her as Entrepreneur of the Year. A thank you note from Celeste Hoffman after Lillian's team had helped her uncover her husband's gambling addiction and get him into treatment, and a bank statement showing enough savings to buy a house with a yard where Sophia could run and play. She'd built something real from the wreckage of her old life. Something honest. Something sustainable. Something that belonged entirely to her and her daughter. As she turned off the lights and headed to her own bedroom, Lillian caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was stronger than the one who'd sat in that courthouse 2 years ago. But more than that, she was whole. She'd learned that love without honesty was just pretty packaging around emptiness. That trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with apologies. And that sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to you could become the foundation for the best thing you ever built. In her bedroom, Lillian opened her laptop and began working on a proposal for a new client, a tech startup whose founder suspected their CFO of embezzlement. The work was complex, challenging, and would probably take 3 months to complete. She was looking forward to it. Outside her window, Los Angeles stretched out beneath a canopy of stars, full of people making choices that would shape their futures. Some of those choices would be honest and some would be lies. But Lillian had learned something important about both. The truth always wins in the end. It just takes someone brave enough to find it and strong enough to act on it. As she worked, Sophia slept peacefully in the next room, dreaming whatever dreams belonged to children who'd never known anything but security and love. And for the first time since that devastating night, when she'd found the messages on Gavin's laptop, Lillian fell asleep planning tomorrow instead of reliving yesterday. The past had taught her who she was. The future was hers to write. Would you have the courage to face the truth when everything you believed about your life turned out to be a lie? Could you find the strength to not just survive betrayal, but transform it into triumph? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.